Hello, Satnam, it's me Shakti Sundari back with you today to read a little bit more from Daniel Odier's book, Desire, the Tantric Path to Awakening, and add a little bit more of my own commentary. So today's video is called Liberation Through Naked Sensation. I thought I'd put the word naked in there just to kind of get you interested, but actually it is about naked perception. It's about naked perception and naked sensation. And this chapter that I'm reading from today is called Sensuality and Consciousness. Now, it gets a little bit complicated in terms of going into some tantric terminology. And when we start using the word consciousness, it can already be a little bit off-putting or sound a little bit complicated, I sometimes think. But actually, it's very simple. So once again, I'm going to do my best to paraphrase in really simple terms what Daniel Odier wants to convey here. So in yesterday's broadcast, I talked about how really all that this tantric teaching is about is making contact with reality through our senses, moment by moment, and being fully aware of every physiological change and response in the body moment by moment. And when we're that present and when we're that aware, we are contacting life itself, and there's the bliss, there's the ecstasy, and there's the freedom. So today there's a little bit more theory and depth behind that, which is a tantric yogic theory of consciousness. So basically there are 5 senses, and then there is the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And in this theory, which is a beautiful structure for understanding ourselves and how we operate, and of course it's just a theory, it's just a structure, but it really helps to perceive things. So we have the 5 senses, which are making direct contact with life. Then we have the conscious and the unconscious mind. And then those 2 aspects of the mind are themselves divided into 2, not being rude. The conscious mind that's attached to the ego, the conscious mind that's not attached to the ego, the unconscious mind that's attached to the ego, and the unconscious mind that's not attached to the ego. And so there you have the whole framework for what happens that gets us into trouble in terms of identifying with the ego aspect, which then sets us up to feel separate from reality. It sets us up to identify with the stories of the past. It sets us up to identify with our memories. It sets us up to identify with this ego I self, and therefore, go into behaviors of fear, of separation, of control, of all kinds of other behaviors that then prevent us from being able to actually be fully present and fully interacting in this naked moment with the now. It's the thoughts, it's the mind that does it, right? If we are able instead to sort of switch into the part of the mind, conscious and unconscious, that's not attached to the ego, which is possible through being present, the practice I talked about yesterday, and or through meditative practice, because we then develop that capacity to enter the neutral mind space, which is something I talk about all the time in Kundalini Yoga, because that's where we're going, to the neutral mind. When we're in the neutral mind space, there's no identification, there's no judgment, there's no good or bad, there simply is. And when we're interacting then from that place, we are able to perceive and interact with life in a fresh way in every moment without the interpretation and the barrier that the mind puts up. I hope that makes sense, but I will read to you a little bit now just to kind of give you a bit of the theory without going too much in depth. So the 5 senses: visual consciousness, olfactory consciousness, which means nose, feeling or tactile consciousness, gustative consciousness, taste, auditory consciousness, listening, right? Then we have the 2 mental consciousnesses: consciousness tied to the ego and therefore duality, and non-dual consciousness. So that's the conscious mind. Then we have the innermost consciousness, or the unconscious, which again is divided into the unconscious He says polluted by its ties to the ego, and immaculate consciousness, the core of your being. So now we see how the game of perception either feeds the unconscious, adding to our confusion or trouble, and annihilating, strong language, our chances of perceiving reality in its essence. So, how many of us are actually perceiving reality as it is? How many of us, how often are actually seeing without, like I've got these glasses on right now. And most of us are going through life, even if we don't wear glasses, with some kind of lenses right here that are in between, like some kind of barrier between us and actual reality, right? Because this is all our beliefs, this is all our judgments, this is all our identifications. How many of us are actually able to nakedly perceive ourselves and reality? Not too many, not much of the time. So what gets us into trouble is mental consciousness. Once again, it's all about the mind. The mind is, it's going to either enslave us or we master it, and then we liberate ourselves. So mental consciousness is the site of all our troubles and anxieties. It is through its identification with the I that it creates the ego, sustains it and reinforces it with each sensation. So, there's a choice there. This is where duality is born, where the world splits into subject and object. This is where observer and observed exist. Linked to memory, this consciousness allows us to function, but it is the cause of all our ego-related errors of interpretation of reality. This is why what we prize in the West as objective consciousness, which has been so elevated throughout modern history, to be objective, actually for the Tantrikas, the Kashmiris, the Buddhists, what they prize more highly is pure subjectivity, meaning pure, untainted by the mind, subjectivity, a sort of your pure experience as this embodied spirit, soul, your pure, naked, unadulterated experience of reality without all of the interpretations, judgments, divisions created by the mind. All right. So when we're able to be in pure subjectivity, then we are able to live liberated in action. So then he goes on to talk about what I would call the neutral mind, right? The word for it here is manovijnana, which could be compared with a computer. I don't like the image because it's too technical for me, but maybe it works for you. A computer that would centralize all perceptions and assure communication without elevating the ego, which would maintain the illusion of being a separate entity. So here the senses communicate to us, listen, I love this bit, to communicate to us their continual harvest with absolute freshness, unmarred by any of the absorbed influences or refuse of the past. So we are interacting nakedly, fresh in every moment, because there's never been this moment before. There's never been this experience before. It's always new. It's always now. And from that neutral mind space, we don't have all the junk of telling us what it is going to be and what it should be and what it was and what that means, blah, 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 blah. There is no more duality, no more distance between the world and the yogi, who as a result marvels at all that surfaces in the consciousness. It's like, oh, wow, 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 all the time, wow, like every minute. That's why in Kundalini Yoga, one of the big mantras is Waheguru, which means like, wow, wow, God is great, wow, like, wow, constantly. It is this consciousness that is operating in each instant of total presence to the reality of a sensation, a thought, or an emotion. It's never happened before. It's new each time. Wow. The play of this centralizing and neutral consciousness does not add anything to a perception. So once again, normally the positive or the negative mind will add, like, oh, that's good, that's bad. She said this, we add something. But no, in the neutral mind, it just is. We just experience it. It does not compare it with others or name, label, devalue, or exaggerate anything that presents itself to us. I do that loads. I exaggerate things because I get excited. That's one of my tendencies, yeah. You can have this experience of naked, unrepeatable sensation by practicing the yoga of presence, which I have already talked about quite a bit, but really that's coming back to that again. So, you know, it sounds really complicated. We talk about consciousness, we talk about non-duality, they're big waffly terms that sound a bit highfalutin. In actual fact, the way to experience that is simply by being here now, through all of our five senses, in contact with reality, and just noticing and just being aware. You know, it starts with that, and it starts with that as a practice, and gradually, you know, that aspect of our being strengthens and expands. Of course, there are other ways to get there, and I teach those as well in Kundalini Yoga and other many tantric meditations, but that's where they're all taking us, is to that non-dual present perception of reality, and that's where the bliss is. And that's where the liberation begins. So that's my little dialogue for today. Monologue, actually, not dialogue. But please add some comments. Love to see what you think, and if this resonates for you and your own experience. Thank you so much for being with me, and join me again tomorrow. Much love and Sat Nam.